Chaos as a faction in Warhammer is horrifying to me. It captures this cosmic supernatural horror aesthetic that is mesmerizingly disturbing, for lack of a better word. But out of the 4 Chaos Gods, those being Khorne, Nurgle, Tzeentch, and Slaanesh is the one that bothers me the most. For those who are unaware, Slaanesh is the Chaos God of excess, the personification of the 7 deadly sins taken to its utmost extreme. In Warhammer Fantasy, Slaanesh just appeared alongside the 3 other Chaos Gods, but in Warhammer 40,000, Slaanesh actually has a pretty fleshed out backstory. Slaanesh was born from the Eldar, or the Eldari, depending on who you ask, around the year 25,000, after millions of years of advancement and basically being top dog of the universe, decided to engage in more eccentric hobbies, where simple parties turned to raves, turned to much darker and scarier things than I can mention on YouTube. And because of this, and the fact that the Eldar are inherently very psychic, and the warp will reflect what those psychic beings do en masse, creating warp storms, making it incapable for humans or anyone else to travel around the galaxy, cutting people off and creating the Age of Strife for humanity, there was an extreme psychic backlash that resulted in the birthing of Slaanesh, making it so that anyone who wasn't in the Eldar webway basically got their souls consumed immediately. Those that survived now live on giant ships called craft worlds, trying to prevent their souls from being stolen by Slaanesh after they die, or engage in decadence to keep their souls intact while Slaanesh withers away at them. And as of the 42nd millennium, Slaanesh now lays claim to many a devotee within space, ranging from the noise marines of the Emperor's Children, all the way to the lowly priests engaging their base urges to an extreme degree, all the while gaining power from the souls of those who lose themselves to their ambitions and urges. Slaanesh has some similarities to other Chaos Gods on a surface level, but the one that I feel like that is most close to is Khorne. But they differ in one major aspect. Take someone who really enjoys fighting in war. That person who enjoys fighting in war, but only for the sake of fighting, and will try to improve their skill, but only for the sake of the fight and nothing else, that person belongs to Khorne. You know, the skulls for the skull throne, blood for the blood god thing. But if that individual, say, was more obsessive, more emotional and ambitious, who had more passion behind them, that emotional drive that pushes someone into direct action is the defining characteristic of someone who would fall to the alluring nature of Slaanesh. Anyone from a lonely man wanting more out of his life to a legendary warrior set on the wrong path is eligible, because Slaanesh represents all of the positive and negative emotions like joy, love, hatred, and envy. It is very easy for someone to fall into the grasp of Slaanesh because of this, especially if that individual is prone to excessive pride. There is a reason why the Emperor's Children fell to Slaanesh so bad. Their lust for perfection in war and all things puts them directly into the line of sight for corruption by Slaanesh. To me, that's the thing that differentiates Slaanesh from the other Chaos Gods. Because in order to gain favor from, say, Khorne, Nurgle, or Tzeentch, you have to prove yourself, you have to basically give up a bit of a bargaining chip to make it seem like they were worth your while. I mean, think about it. Angron was looking for purpose and got hoodwinked by Lorgarn becoming a demon of Khorne. Magnus wanted to save his sons, and Mortarion got tricked by Typhus. You can walk into the realm of Slaanesh and be deemed worthy just by your zeal and energy alone. And that, to me, makes them easily the most dangerous Chaos God. And while Fulgrim was inadvertently hoodwinked by the Layer Blade, that doesn't change the fact that most of the Emperor's Children went over to Slaanesh willingly, Fulgrim included, despite the manipulation. They wanted more, and they would not stop until they got it. I mean, for God's sakes, Lucius betrayed Saul Tarvitz for nothing more than pure spite. That type of mindset perfectly typifies the attitude of Slaanesh's greatest champions. Whether it is Fulgrim, Lucius, or Sigvald, Slaanesh is an ever-encompassing force that pulls in the ambitious and driven, manipulating them into a wild obsession and making those who could have good intentions into nothing more than urge-driven monsters that are slaves to their own darkness. Slaanesh, to me, isn't just a chaos god that is the domain over whips and chains and rock and roll to the point where it's ridiculous. It's not just noise marines and Fabius Bile tinkering. Those who serve Slaanesh won't chop you up with a chain axe or annihilate you with a tank like the World Eaters or Iron Warriors. They're a waking nightmare, representing the worst pain and pleasure available to any living being. Being in the presence of anyone associated is the worst nightmare possible. Do not bother running, because they will be right behind you, toying with you like a cat does a mouse, laughing all the while, until they finally catch you and subject you to things that would make you wish you never existed. So with all that being said, I wish Slaanesh appeared more in 40k. I mean, sure, the Emperor's Children are a really cool faction, and we just got a book with Fabius Bile and Belisarius Cawl, which was quite good. But I don't see the ground-level threat that Slaanesh poses on average. And I know that we're gonna get the Emperor's Children relaunch soon, given that all the major Chaos-derived legions are now their own specific factions, instead of specific rule sets, say in the 3rd edition or 3.5 Chaos Space Marine codexes. But outside of tabletop, I want a more story-central presence. Not just short stories or something else. Something that would show up as either supporting antagonist or something that is alluded to. Because as someone who's a fan of films like Saw and Hellraiser, and especially Event Horizon, this is a unique type of horror that could be represented in 40k a lot more often. But I understand why Slaanesh is not depicted as often. Tzeentch is basically just magic. Khorne is violence, and Nurgle is disease and gross-out horror. Those, while still grotesque in many ways, are easier pills to swallow for, say, a parent whose child wants to get into Warhammer, and this kid picks up a book and you skim through, and then you see a page seeing what an average Slaanesh cult does on a Tuesday afternoon. That's not going to be a sell, and that parent is not going to allow their kids to get into the hobby, because all they're going to see is that and never let them touch it again. Slaanesh is not marketable. As cool as they are, it's not a very marketable entity, despite how fascinating it is to me. But there is a fair amount of potential. The concept of being, say, a guardsman sitting in a foxhole hearing the deafening sound of noise marines wailing and charging your position, or being captured by a Drakari raiding party would be horrifying to see. I just wish we saw it more. Slaanesh as a faction has a lot of potential, and I just wished it was brought more into the forefront. Thank you all very much. Have a great night. Khorne is a very unsubtle chaos god. This is not surprising. He's the blood god, the lord of skulls, and a very angry boy who sits upon his skull throne, watching the endless war occurring day to day in the 41st millennium with the same temperament as a sports fan when the bar closes. He's probably the simplest chaos god to understand, where other chaos gods have ulterior motives and schemes to a degree. Khorne has none of that. He wants blood, he wants skulls. If you give him blood and skulls, he is a happy boy and will bestow you with special abilities and weapons. If you fail him, he will then take your skull instead. In a weirdly roundabout way, he's probably the most honest chaos god, because you don't need to worry about him stabbing you in the back, just about him turning your face into paste. Khorne values strength of character and skill over anything else. He doesn't see war as an art form, just as an opportunity to prove that you are the best. His relationships with the other Chaos Gods are a bit interesting, because while he gets along with Nurgle fine, he doesn't like magic at all, putting him at odds with Tzeentch as he sees it as little more than a waste of time and that real fighting skill doesn't come from magic. But he absolutely despises Slaanesh, to the point where Slaanesh and Khorne have been at war for each other since I think Slaanesh was birthed. If you want to hear more about what my thoughts are on Slaanesh, go look at my Slaanesh video. But the short version is, Slaanesh is basically being a pretentious dweeb that's overcomplicating things in the eyes of Khorne. He's basically just standing there on the sidelines yelling at Slaanesh to just kill the guy instead of, doing what Slaanesh does on a daily basis. And it also doesn't help that they tend to compete over the same type of champions, as they both value combatants who are very, very skilled. I mean, the best example of this is the difference between Lucius and Khorne. While Lucius is a pretentious dweeb who's incredibly ambitious and seeing swordsmanship as an art, Khorne is screaming and cutting things apart with his chain axe like it's paper. Another difference between Khorne and the other Chaos Gods is that he's not as scary. If the 40k Chaos Gods represented a different demon archetype in fiction, I would say Khorne fits more comfortably into the same type of style of demons that the Doom games have, where they're just killing machines and nothing more. Khorne also has a more traditional fire and brimstone hell aesthetic that ties really well into his overall motif, and I actually quite like it. That isn't to say, of course, that Khorne can't be scary. He can be. I mean, their main frontline poster boy unit, the Khorne Berserker, is absolutely terrifying when you really break it down. Well, yes, they can be seen as just melee guys running around with chain axes. The mind of the people committing these actions has to be so broken and twisted where they can be barely recognized as human. Most Khorne Berserkers belong to the World Eaters, Khorne's chosen Chaos Space Marine Legion, with most warbands having some Khorne Berserkers in their ranks as long as they aren't devoted to a specific Chaos God. A Chaos Space Marine is already terrifying, but Khorne Berserkers are the most devoted and insane of his followers, and this insanity can come with a trance-like, bloodlust-induced rage, resulting in the massacre of hundreds, if not thousands, in the span of hours, only for that Berserker to wake up, not remember that it happened, and continue to do this all in the service of a god that would be just as happy to see that same Berserker die as he would win. That is a level of discomfort that I don't even want to think about. Easily the most famous of the Khorne Berserkers has to be Khorne the Betrayer, a personal favorite character of mine in the entire Warhammer setting, and he is completely insane. He got the name the Betrayer during a fight with the Emperor's children, where the weather conditions on the planet got so bad that both sides decided to stop fighting and take shelter. This angered Khorne, and he began to kill his comrades with a flamer because he was not going to accept any reason to stop fighting. That is the level of maniacal bloodlust we are dealing with here. There are also various cults devoted to Khorne as well, with the death cult in particular being a problem and perform group activities that I can't really talk about on YouTube. These guys might scare me more than Khorne Berserkers, because a Khorne Berserker is a super soldier. That's kind of a rung above, and they don't really seem human. But these cultists are just people who are crazy, and the fact that someone like me can act like that is disturbing, to say the least. Khorne also has various demons devoted to him, with the Bloodthirster being probably the most famous. A Bloodthirster is basically one rung below Khorne. They're the physical manifestation of what Khorne believes and desires, and when one shows up, you're going to have a really bad time, and they're also quite scary. Bloodletters, Fleshhounds, and Juggernauts all serve their roles as Khornate infantry, with Bloodletters being infantry, and Juggernauts being mounts, as well as Fleshhounds being basically Khornate attack dogs. They're cannon fodder, but quite effective cannon fodder. But easily, Khorne's most famous devotee is the demon Primarch Angron, who is Khorne's chosen champion, and as of 10th edition, he is back within the setting and is probably going to play a major role in the storyline as it progresses. Angron is easily one of my favorite Primarchs, and is an extremely fascinating and well-written character. So well-written and portrayed, in fact, that I'm going to make a video entirely about him. Khorne as a whole, while can be seen as a bit of a bog-standard demon archetype, has more going on under the hood, and has a good balance overall of the over-the-top action and genuine horror. He's been my second favorite Chaos God for a long time, and I really enjoy reading or seeing anything that has to do with him. For reading recommendations, I would say the old Liber Chaotica art books are good. They're hard to track down, but the Khorne one in particular is quite good. The Chaos Space Marines 3rd edition and 3.5 edition codexes are great as well, with some fantastic art to boot. The Disciples of the Dark Gods Dark Heresy book is also really good. They have a few tidbit lore pieces that really flesh out various different Chaos Gods, and Khorne has a couple things in there that are quite unsettling. Unsettling to the point that I didn't even want to put them in this video because of how much they bother me. Lastly, Khorne, Eater of Worlds, and Betrayer are both fantastic novels about the World Eaters, Khorne the Betrayer, and Angron. Thank you all very much for watching. Have a great night. Nurgle as a Chaos God is one that is both incredibly disturbing and incredibly comforting at the same time. For those who are unaware, Nurgle is the Chaos God of death and decay, along with disease. And for anyone who isn't the average soldier type in the Warhammer 40k universe, this would be one of the worst Chaos Gods to deal with. And I would like to show you why. Imagine you live on a high world, or some other world where you are a noble of some sort. You have vast resources but are incredibly busy, and starting to get worn down, you haven't had a break in years, and you want more than anything to just sit down and rest. All of a sudden, you get incredibly sick. And despite your vast resources, the doctors can't find anything objectively wrong with you, making all of those resources that you have at your disposal completely useless. And for the first time in your life, you feel powerless. You're absolutely terrified and scrambling to find anything that will make your life last longer. And then all of a sudden, you begin to hear a voice offering to take that away from you, to replace the pain with bliss. But only if you give up your humanity. Your fear gets the better of you, and you agree. And this results in the beginnings of a cult. This cult reaches out and recruits others into your ranks, allowing for Nurgle's gifts to spread more and more as time goes on, rituals get conducted, people start to disappear, and giving it a few months to a year, it has spread all over the planet, resulting in a situation like the planet of Tertium or the Plague Wars during the Indomitus Crusade. And as you sink deeper and deeper into Nurgle's rabbit hole, you begin to experience the effects of Nurgle's rot, a plague that every single follower of Nurgle is subjected to. Its symptoms including the likes of skin rotting and falling off, as well as it bloating. Maggots and pustules full of disease will develop in and outside of your body. Your stomach will burst open, with your intestines hanging out and rotting away for all to see. But, being a follower of Nurgle, you don't experience any of the pain that comes along with these things, because what he does is provide comfort. He takes away the pain and makes you rot, but you are so distracted and blissful for the first time in your life, you are not even aware of it. And this doesn't apply just to cultists and even space marines, but this applies to his demons as well. Every single follower of Nurgle, whether it's a human cultist, space marine, or demon, all have this innate sense of joy and bliss and relaxation that most people in the 41st millennium cannot even dream of having. Not only this, but Nurgle is genuinely kind to his followers, with many of them seeing him as a father figure and caretaker, with most of them residing inside of his garden, the realm of warp space where he himself and all of his demons reside. Most mortal followers of Nurgle hope to make the journey to Nurgle's garden one day, finally achieving a sense of peace and never leaving there. But this mental security, this happiness, this innate sense of joy and life only applies if you submit yourself. If you give up your humanity, your individuality, and everything that makes you, you. And let's just say, even if you decide to turn all of that down, Nurgle's answer to that is to just let you feel all of the pain that you're currently subjected to. All the maggots, all of the skin, decaying, all of it. And he won't let you die either. He will keep you alive forever to feel this unimaginable pain, just so that way you'll submit to him. Nurgle is inherently manipulative, which is something I don't see talked about or even considered, because if you really think about it, Nurgle represents more than just death and decay. He represents an aspect of conditional love that many people in the real world experience day to day. He will only give you that relief and that peace if you submit yourself to him, to give him what he wants, not what you want. He preys on your needs, your fears, your desires, and he isn't honest about it. He's a liar, and I know that he's not a nice guy. He's a chaos god. Chaos god's bad. That's not a new statement or a new sentiment, but it's still something that I don't see talked about a lot, which, in my opinion, is fascinating. The idea that a chaos god masquerading as a form of kindness, when in reality he could easily be the most manipulative chaos god next to Tzeentch, who he royally hates, is interesting. Not only does it make him an incredibly manipulative chaos god, it also makes him a hypocrite. And that, to me, makes him infinitely scarier than just being the chaos god of bugs and the seasonal flu. Manipulative behavioral tendencies aside, Nurgle himself has a lot at his disposal. His demons in particular are both gross and high in number, with poxwalkers basically being zombies that are incredibly strong, with even a group of 4 being able to nearly drown a space marine on the moon of Davin during the events of False Gods. The Beast of Nurgle is both incredibly dangerous and weirdly endearing, considering the fact that they just have the demeanor of your average brand new puppy. Also, fun fact, it will eventually get depressed after stomping on all of its new friends, and then it will turn into a rotfly, which will then be used as a plague drone. The Great Unclean One, however, is basically just an avatar of Nurgle and is easily the most recognizable Nurgle demon outside of the Nurgling, which are basically just Great Unclean Ones, but not as intelligent and significantly smaller. However, Nurgle isn't just limited to his forces of demons, as his chosen Chaos Space Marine Legion are the primary heralds of the Plague Lord's reign over many individuals throughout the galaxy. The Death Guard are one of 3 traitor legions that did not shatter in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, and while not being the biggest of all the legions, they make up for it in sheer tankiness. The Death Guard, like the other Chaos-devoted legions, are intrinsically linked with their Chaos God, as they often get blessings directly from Nurgle, with many warbands roaming the galaxy causing havoc for anyone and everyone they end up coming across. Most of the Death Guard forces are commanded by Mortarion, or Typhon, with Typhon being Nurgle's chosen champion, and some of you may wonder why that is. Well, Typhon was the one who was directly responsible for pledging the Death Guard to Nurgle, so I guess even to Chaos Gods, the concept of dibs still applies. He also has a giant hive of bugs inside of his body called the Destroyer Hive
that he can just send out to basically just turn everything into nothing but rot and bones whenever he wants to, so that's a thing. As of late, they have been a particular pain in the ass for the Imperium, as during the Plague Wars, they caused a lot of problems in the Ultramar sector that got so bad that when Guilliman basically died, the spirit of the Emperor had to possess him and then show up inside of Nurgle's garden and rock Nurgle's shit to get him to cut it out. And while they aren't the most tactically diverse legion, they are shock assault primarily, make no mistake, they make up for it in their ability to grind anything they come across into paste. Combined with the fact they usually have a full force of demons behind them, the Death Guard showing up on your homeworld would be a bad, bad time. Nurgle, on the whole, is a pretty layered chaos god than one would initially assume, and while on the surface there seems to be a lot of basic ideas, which admittedly there are, digging through those ideas reveals things that are far more unsettling and disturbing than one would initially realize. For reading recommendations, I would say listen to The King of Pigs and The Deacon of Wounds from the Warhammer Horror imprint, the Chaos Space Marines 3.5 or 3rd edition codexes, and Liber Chaotica Nurgle, along with the books The Lords of Silence, the Dark Imperium trilogy, and The Buried Dagger, which covers the events of Nurgle claiming the Death Guard as his chosen legion. Thank you all very much for watching. Have a great night. Tzeentch is an interesting chaos god, because unlike the other three, the threat Tzeentch poses is more existential than physical. He's also incredibly confusing. And that has nothing to do with what he represents, but more with what he actually does. The other three Chaos Gods are largely predictable. Nurgle wants the rot to spread, Khorne wants your skull, and Slaanesh wants, well, everything else. Tzeentch, on the other hand, wants what Tzeentch wants at that time. This can mean, quite literally, anything and everything. And on the surface, that doesn't sound all that scary, until you consider the fact that you can manipulate a local guard commander into having incredibly subtle hallucinations that results in their spaceship getting lost in the warp and becoming demon food, or an employee of a business begins to perceive their job's building layout change ever so slightly day by day to the point where they begin to question their own sanity, or an individual in the ecclesiarchy is sitting with a friend, and when he looks at that friend, he sees something absolutely terrifying and begins to claw out his eyes, when in reality, all that friend sitting next to him is doing is eating a sandwich. Tzeentch, of all the Chaos Gods, represents truly unknowable cosmic horror. The other Chaos Gods, to some degree, are bound by rules, either set by themselves or based on their personality, but they are quantifiable and easily categorized in many ways. You can't apply that same logic to Tzeentch, because he has no rules, and if there are any, he breaks them all the time. The only thing concrete we know about him is what he represents, that being magic, and hope to some degree, just incredibly twisted and distorted. It's not a shock to say that Tzeentch is inherently manipulative, but it's almost in a way where if you know anything about any of the Chaos Gods, he comes full circle to becoming honest, where you know if you pledge your soul in service to Tzeentch, that you will just end up getting screwed over and turned into a blob at some point or another. This does not apply if you are either incredibly stubborn, ambitious, or skilled at something. In the case of Magnus and Ahriman, they have all of those things in spades. He actually likes a bit of defiance. I mean, for God's sakes, Ahriman hates Tzeentch and has tried to break away from him several times, and despite the fact that he has come very close to multiple times, Tzeentch just does nothing to him and just kind of laughs it off because that's what he does. Because he has plans on top of plans on top of plans, and those who are ambitious and driven and stubborn like Ahriman and Magnus will often play into Tzeentch's plans long-term, actually helping him more than hurting him, even if they don't realize it. Not only is Tzeentch incredibly thorough, he's also incredibly selfish, and will do anything and everything to service his own personal goals, even if they are completely nonsensical. In fact, he will straight up self-sabotage if it helps him in some way down the line. At one point, Tzeentch was the most powerful entity in the entirety of the Warp, which pissed off Khorne and Nurgle, and as a result of this, they teamed up and started waging war against Tzeentch, and when Tzeentch was right about to lose, he decided to crystallize himself and got shattered into a million pieces, not only spreading his influence across the Warp, but also making magic more easily accessible to those in real space. Speaking of Nurgle, those two hate each other and have been waging war against each other since basically forever. There are times where it's in fact gotten so bad that Tzeentch will just manipulate Khorne into fighting for him, because considering the fact that Khorne is a big angry rage monster, it's not going to be too hard to turn him against someone else. Tzeentch will do this type of mental gymnastic manipulative garbage to literally anybody. In fact, there is a situation in the book The Reverie where
he convinced an entire city by posing as a water wheel that the water wheel was a god. That's like convincing my hometown that the phone booth is a god. Well, I guess the Adeptus Mechanicus would believe that, but that's besides the point. And better yet, someone decided to interact with this freaking water wheel, and then he turned into a chaos spawn immediately. And this was all part of a larger plan to corrupt the Blood Angel successor, the Angels Resplendent, which are now the Angels Penitent, who were corrupted at the time but didn't know it yet, all for a larger and much more enveloping mystery that I'm not going to spoil because The Reverie is a very good book and you should read it. Tzeentch's demons and those devoted to him as well are also incredibly unique, as the demons tend to take on a lot of aspects of Tzeentch's more Machiavellian and thoughtful nature. The Lord of Change is basically the autonomous greater demon of Tzeentch, using their magic and intelligence to command the various demon legions at their disposal, which also have different tactical uses and ways of fighting. Yes, Tzeentch uses battle tactics versus just flooding an area with demons, which is honestly something that I really like, especially since the other Chaos Gods don't do that. Most of his demons also rely heavily on ranged attacks, not resorting to melee super often, with the Horror and Flamer mostly hanging back and shooting at things, with the Screamers using hit-and-run tactics, diving in, grabbing and ripping things apart with their claws, and flying away. The Thousand Sons are also his chosen Space Marine Legion, that he, for lack of a better word, just tricked into his service without any prior corrupted inside man, which, given that Tzeentch is the master of Ponzi schemes, makes sense. The Thousand Sons were led by Magnus the Red, a very arrogant and skilled psyker who, due to Lehman proceeding to nay-nay him and break his back, along with his entire planet being set on fire, had little choice to either let him and his entire legion die, or pledge himself and his entire legion to the service of Tzeentch. As of the 41st millennium, though, most of the legion consists of rubric marines, marines that are little more than droneless automata because they're not actually people anymore. They're just dust inside of a power-armored suit because Ahriman, trying to get rid of the issues with the flesh change, bungled the entire legion as a result, making Magnus incredibly mad, resulting in Ahriman and anyone who worked with him being banished from the planet of the sorcerers. And since that time, Ahriman has spent the last 10,000 years trying to unbungle the bungle he created for the legion, with Magnus basically just doing whatever the heck he wants, serving Tzeentch, and just having a bit of a victim complex about everything. Now, in all honesty, Tzeentch is not my favorite Chaos God. Conceptually, from a glance, if I didn't know anything about the setting, he easily would be, but in execution, I have some issues. Mostly with the fact that we are told all of these things about Tzeentch, but we don't really see it. The only thing we do see is the mustache-twirling supervillain thing. He's not portrayed as this existential cosmic horror being that he should be. He's this mustache-twirling Saturday morning cartoon villain turning people into blobs because he thinks it's funny. And that aspect doesn't bother me. The idea that a benevolent, incredibly malicious god is just messing with people because he thinks it's funny, that is awesome. And if you blended that with the cosmic horror elements to offset that, that would be honestly terrifying. But we don't get that. Instead, we basically just get the god equivalent of the Riddler from the Batman Arkham games. I think what would really benefit Tzeentch is making him have a larger role, or at least act in a different way where we see him from the perspective of someone that isn't Ahriman or Magnus. Like, say, a book like The King of Pigs, but for Tzeentch. The King of Pigs did a fantastic job showing how horrifying Nurgle could be. I feel like a similar approach for Tzeentch would be amazing, and it doesn't even need to be in the Warhammer horror imprint. Just something more in terms of portrayal rather than just Machiavellian scheming. Despite these setbacks, I do really enjoy Tzeentch. I love all of the Chaos Gods, and to be completely honest, reading about Tzeentch and trying to figure out and do research for this video was a lot of fun. For reading recommendations, I would once again recommend Liber Chaotica. I know I keep recommending Liber Chaotica, but that's because it's really, really good, and you should definitely read it. The Ahriman series of books, The Crimson King, 1,000 Suns, the Chaos Space Marines 3rd edition / 3.5 edition codexes, Chaos Demons 4th edition and 8th edition, and if you're feeling a bit freaky, the Soul Drinkers books are really, really good. They have some good information about Tzeentch, although they aren't really focused on them. They're more focused on the Soul Drinkers. There is some good stuff in there. Thank you all very much for watching. Have a great night.